When we talk about desire, most people think of the body, the heartbeat, the skin, the touch. But the real story begins somewhere deeper inside the brain. Because the truth is, sex doesn't start in the bedroom. It starts in the mind. Every fantasy, every spark of attraction, every moment of intimacy is wired through a complex dance of chemistry and emotion. In this documentary, diving into what psychology teaches us about desire, how the brain builds shapes, and sometimes even sabotages our intimate connections. People often say that sex is physical, that it's something that happens between bodies. But if you really pay attention, you'll realize something far more fascinating. Sex actually begins in the brain. It's not your skin or your hormones or even your partner's touch that first ignites desire. It's your neurons. The brain is, without question, our most powerful sex organ. It orchestrates everything from the first flicker of attraction to the pulse of pleasure that follows. Every whisper of desire, every craving for connection is born not between the sheets, but between your ears. Think about it. You've probably felt turned on by someone's voice, their confidence, their energy. Maybe you've been drawn to someone who isn't your type at all. And yet there's this magnetic pull you can't explain. That's your brain at work. It's reading micro expressions, decoding tone, registering scent, and translating it all into emotional chemistry. Your body just follows orders. Desire starts as a story your brain tells itself, a story about possibility, closeness, and pleasure. And like every good story, it's shaped by your past, your psychology, and even your fears. Neuroscientists have literally watched desire happen. When people look at someone they find attractive, regions like the hypothalamus, nucleus accumbens, and amygdala light up on brain scans. These are the same reward centers that activate when we eat something delicious or win something exciting. Your brain is saying, "This feels good, let's have more of it." And then in an instant, hormones like dopamine and oxytocin flood the system. Dopamine gives you that rush of anticipation, that thrilling edge of wanting. Oxytocin, sometimes called the bonding hormone, creates connection and trust. Together, they weave the chemistry of intimacy. But what's even more fascinating is that this chemistry is unique to every person. What turns one person on might do absolutely nothing for another. That's because our brains are constantly shaped by experience. A smell that arouses you might remind someone else of their grandmother's house and completely kill the mood. Our erotic preferences are like fingerprints, formed by biology, but molded by memory. Desire is learned, layered, and deeply personal. One of the biggest myths we've been told is that sexual attraction is purely instinctive, something primitive or animalistic. But human desire is far more psychological than people think. For instance, studies have found that our brains can get aroused by thoughts alone. You don't even need physical contact, just an idea, an image, or a fantasy can activate the same neural circuits that light up during actual sex. That means imagination is a major player in our sexual lives. The mind doesn't just influence arousal, it creates it. And here's the twist: the more we try to separate the mind from the body, the less satisfying our sexual experiences tend to become. People often ask me, what's the key to better sex? And my answer is always the same: it's understanding your brain. Because when you understand how your mind processes desire, you stop chasing surface level stimulation and start tapping into the deeper story behind what excites you. For example, let's talk about anticipation. Psychologically speaking, anticipation is one of the strongest aphrodisiacs. When you look forward to something, your brain releases dopamine, heightening pleasure before the experience even begins. It's why a slow build up, a look, a touch, a pause feels more erotic than rushing into things. The brain loves the tease. It craves novelty, but it also craves meaning. That's why emotional connection often amplifies physical pleasure. When your brain links sex with safety, affection, or significance, the experience becomes richer, deeper, more satisfying. And yet, not everyone's brain works the same way. Some people are wired to crave variety and novelty, others are drawn to comfort and emotional intimacy. Some need mystery to stay aroused, others need familiarity. None of these patterns are wrong, they're just reflections of how individual brains balance reward, risk, and attachment. Even within a single relationship, the brain's responses shift over time. Early passion runs on dopamine, long term love runs on oxytocin and serotonin. That's why the wild excitement of new attraction feels different from the warmth of deep intimacy. They're both love, but neurologically, they're two different flavors. Our brains also play a surprisingly large role in what happens when desire fades. You might think a lack of interest in sex is about hormones or age, but often it's about stress. When you're anxious, your brain releases cortisol, a hormone that literally suppresses sexual desire. The body goes into survival mode. It doesn't care about pleasure when it's busy managing threats. That's why mental health and sexual health are so deeply connected. A calm mind is an aroused mind. The more relaxed your brain feels, the more freely desire can flow. And then there's fantasy, the playground of the erotic mind. Most people have fantasies, and contrary to popular belief, they're not random or dirty secrets to be ashamed of. They're clues. Every fantasy tells you something about your emotional world. Some people fantasize about power, others about submission. Some crave adventure, others intimacy. In my research, I found that fantasies often reflect psychological needs, like control, freedom, or connection that may be missing in daily life. The brain uses sexual imagery to explore emotions it can't safely express elsewhere. So, in a way, fantasies are the language your brain uses to communicate what it truly wants. Of course, our brains can also confuse us. They're masters of contradiction. You can love someone deeply but not feel sexually drawn to them in a certain moment. You can crave someone you know isn't good for you. You can even experience arousal in situations where you don't want to act on it. That's because arousal and attraction aren't the same thing. Arousal is a reflex, your brain responding to stimuli. Attraction, on the other hand, is meaning. It's who you choose to desire. Our brains are wired for complexity. And that's what makes human sexuality so endlessly fascinating. There's a beautiful paradox in all this. The more we understand the science of desire, the more mysterious it becomes. We can map the chemicals, identify the regions of the brain that light up, and still not fully explain why one touch feels electric and another doesn't. Part of that mystery is emotional memory. Every sexual experience you've ever had leaves an imprint in your brain, tiny associations between pleasure, safety, and connection. These imprints form your unique erotic template. That's why the brain doesn't just control desire, it remembers it. It stores the echoes of past intimacy, shaping how you respond in the present. And this is where intimacy comes in. Intimacy isn't just physical closeness, it's psychological safety. When two people share trust, when they feel seen and accepted, the brain releases oxytocin in powerful waves. That's what makes someone's touch feel comforting instead of mechanical, what turns sex into connection. The most passionate experiences often come not from physical intensity, but from emotional openness. Your brain interprets that safety is permission to let go. If you've ever wondered why forbidden or secretive sex can feel so thrilling, the answer again lies in the brain. When something feels risky or taboo, your amygdala and ventral striatum get involved, areas linked to reward and danger. The mix of fear and excitement amplifies arousal. It's the same reason adrenaline junkies love roller coasters. While that kind of desire burns hot, it rarely lasts long. Sustainable intimacy is fueled not by danger, but by emotional presence. Your brain can't relax into pleasure if it doesn't feel secure. And here's something rarely talked about: the brain doesn't distinguish much between physical and emotional pain. That's why rejection or betrayal hurts so deeply. It activates the same neural pathways as a physical wound. But the reverse is also true. Loving touch, affirmation, and sexual connection can literally heal the brain. They increase endorphins, reduce stress hormones, and strengthen emotional resilience. In other words, intimacy isn't just pleasure, it's medicine. What's most striking about all this is how the brain constantly balances two opposing needs: excitement and safety. We crave novelty, but we also crave security. Too much predictability and the brain gets bored. Too much chaos and it shuts down. The secret to long-term desire isn't about chasing extremes. It's about keeping that balance alive. Introducing small doses of surprise curiosity or vulnerability can reignite the neural spark without threatening the bond. The healthiest relationships aren't the ones that avoid change. They're the ones that keep discovering each other. When you really think about it, desire is a kind of communication between your conscious and unconscious mind. It's your brain's way of telling you what feels alive. The sensations you crave, the fantasies that excite you, the people you're drawn to, they're all messages. They reveal not just what your body wants, but what your mind is seeking: connection, validation, excitement, safety, meaning. When you start listening to those messages with curiosity instead of judgment, your entire relationship with desire changes. That's the beauty of understanding the psychology of sex. It turns something people often see as physical or taboo into something deeply human and profoundly meaningful. It reminds us that behind every sexual impulse is a thinking, feeling brain trying to connect, to explore, to feel alive. The more we learn about that, the closer we get to understanding not just how we love, but why. So yes, the brain is the ultimate sex organ. It decides when you want, who you want, and how you express that desire. It's sculpted by your experiences, your emotions, your memories, and your dreams. Every look, every fantasy, every intimate moment is an echo of your brain's deepest language, the language connection. And once you understand that you realize that sex isn't just about what happens to your body, it's about what happens within your mind. Desire, at its core, is the brain's way of reaching out for something more than pleasure. It's about meaning, memory, and connection. It's the mind's most intimate form of curiosity. Its way of asking, who am I when I'm most alive? That's what makes it so powerful, so endlessly mysterious, and so beautifully human. When we think about desire, most of us picture something physical, a touch, a look, maybe even chemistry that feels electric. But the truth is, desire isn't just about the body at all. It's about meaning, it's about emotion, memory, and the hidden stories our brains tell us about love and connection. Every time you're drawn to someone, every time your body responds or your heart skips a beat, your brain isn't just reacting, it's remembering, interpreting, and reimagining what intimacy means to you. What psychology teaches us is that sex and desire are deeply intertwined with who we are, not just what we do. They're expressions of our inner world, shaped by every experience, every fear, every hope we've carried through life. You could even say that sex is a mirror. It reflects how we think, how we love, and how safe we feel being truly seen. It's fascinating when you realize how much the brain shapes the meaning of desire. Imagine this: two people kiss. On the surface, it's the same action, the same lips, the same motion. But for one person, that kiss might feel thrilling, intoxicating, full of possibility. For another, it might feel awkward, empty, or even uncomfortable. What makes the difference? It's not the technique, it's the story the brain attaches to it. The first person's brain releases dopamine, oxytocin, and endorphins, signaling reward and connection. The second person's brain, on the other hand, might trigger anxiety or even fear if intimacy feels unsafe or unfamiliar. Our sexual responses aren't random, they're emotional codes. The brain constantly cross references our memories, values, and associations to decide how something feels. Desire is the outcome of that decoding process. That's why the same stimulus, a certain look, a certain voice, even a certain kind of touch, can feel wildly different depending on your emotional context. Take emotional intimacy, for example. Neuroscientists have found that when people experience emotional closeness with a partner, regions of the brain associated with safety and trust, like the prefrontal cortex, become more active. That feeling of safety actually lowers the brain's threat response, allowing more pleasure signals to flow freely. It's why love and sex feel so much more powerful when they're emotionally connected. The body may respond to stimulation, but the brain decides how meaningful it feels. Desire isn't just a hunger for touch, it's a craving for understanding. Our brains evolved to link sexual pleasure with emotional connection because for humans, survival wasn't just about reproduction, it was about bonding. The release of oxytocin during sex or even during simple affection is a biological mechanism for attachment. It makes us want to stay close to the people who make us feel good. But that same chemistry also makes intimacy emotionally risky. The closer you get, the more your brain invests in that bond. The same neural pathways that make love feel euphoric can also make heartbreak feel unbearable. This duality is part of what makes human sexuality so complex. We're driven by both biological urges and psychological meaning. In studies of long term couples, researchers found that sexual satisfaction is predicted far more by emotional intimacy than by frequency of sex or physical attraction alone. When people feel emotionally distant, even great physical chemistry tends to fade. But when there's emotional resonance, when someone feels seen, valued, and safe, their brain interprets sexual connection as something profound, even transcendent. Our brains don't separate sex from emotion as easily as we might think. At every encounter we have leaves an imprint, a kind of emotional fingerprint that influences future desire. Think about your first crush. Your first heartbreak, your most intimate moments, they all live inside your neural networks, quietly shaping how you connect today. If someone once made you feel rejected or unsafe, your brain might now associate vulnerability with risk. But if someone made you feel desired and accepted, that memory becomes part of your erotic map. It tells your brain, this is what connection feels like. One of the most fascinating things psychology has uncovered is how the brain links desire to identity. Our attractions aren't just about who we find beautiful, they reflect who we are and who we wish to be. That's why fantasies are so revealing. They're not always about what we literally want to do, they're about what our subconscious wants to feel. Someone might fantasize about being pursued not because they crave dominance, but because they crave to be desired, to feel chosen, powerful, or free. Desire becomes a language through which our inner needs speak, and those needs evolve. The brain's relationship with intimacy changes over time. Early in life, desire might be driven by novelty and exploration, the thrill of the unknown. But as we grow and our emotional worlds expand, intimacy becomes about depth, security, and emotional honesty. The same neural systems that once craved excitement start craving belonging. That's not a loss of passion, it's a transformation of meaning. The fire is still there, it just burns differently. When psychologists study couples who've stayed sexually satisfied for decades, one thing stands out: curiosity. These partners stay interested not just in each other's bodies, but in each other's minds. They keep discovering new layers of emotional and psychological intimacy. The brain loves novelty, but novelty doesn't always mean new people. It can mean new experiences, new depths, new ways of seeing someone you already know. When the brain finds meaning in intimacy, it stays engaged even years later. It's also worth noting how differently our brains experience desire depending on context. For instance, stress can shut desire down almost instantly. When the brain is flooded with cortisol, the hormone that signals danger, it deprioritizes reproduction and pleasure. But if that same person feels emotionally supported, their brain can quickly shift gears. It's a reminder that the conditions for desire aren't just physical, they're emotional and psychological. Safe space equals free desire. Another intriguing insight comes from studies of anticipation. The brain often finds more pleasure in the build up than the act itself. When we anticipate intimacy, dopamine rises, making us feel alert, excited, and hopeful. That's why emotional foreplay, flirting, teasing, exchanging meaningful glances can be more powerful than the physical act. It's the brain's way of savoring possibility. But when intimacy becomes routine or emotionally disconnected, that anticipation fades, and with it, so does passion. What's truly beautiful about all this is how personal desire really is. It's not a formula or a checklist, it's an emotional ecosystem, a living reflection of how your brain seeks connection. Some people crave intensity, others crave tenderness. Some need mystery, others need familiarity. The common thread is meaning. Desire thrives when it feels emotionally significant, when the brain can connect the experience to something deeper, whether it's love, trust, excitement, or even self discovery. In a sense, every sexual experience is a conversation between your body and your mind. Your body expresses, your mind interprets. When those two are in sync, when what you feel matches what you mean, the result isn't just pleasure, it's fulfillment. But when they're out of sync, even the most passionate encounters can feel hollow. This is why understanding the psychology of desire matters so much. Because when you know how your brain creates meaning, you can create intimacy that feels genuinely alive. We often underestimate how much of desire lives in the space between words. The eye contact that lingers just a little longer. The tone in someone's voice that says, "I see you." The subtle ways we reveal or hide our vulnerability. The brain picks up on all of it. Mirror neurons, cells that allow us to empathize, literally fire when we sense someone's interest or affection. That's how connection begins, not through logic, but through resonance. Your brain feels the other person's emotions almost as if they were your own. That's why mutual desire feels electric. It's two brains synchronizing in real time. And that synchronization is what makes intimacy so healing. Studies show that when people engage in emotionally connected sex, their brain waves can actually align, their breathing syncs, their heart rates match. It's as if the boundaries between two people soften for a moment. The brain reads that as ultimate safety. I belong here. I am wanted. That's why sex, when it's meaningful, can reduce anxiety, improve sleep, and even boost immune function. It's not just about release, it's about regulation. Intimacy helps balance the brain, yet meaning can also make sex complicated. Because when sex carries emotional weight, it also carries vulnerability. If someone feels rejected, unseen, or betrayed, their brain doesn't just register disappointment. It interprets it as a threat. The same pathways that release oxytocin during bonding can release pain signals during loss. Emotional intimacy amplifies everything, the pleasure and the pain. But that's part of what makes it so profoundly human. We're wired not just to feel, but to care about what we feel. What psychology ultimately reveals is that sex isn't separate from our emotional lives. It's an extension of them. When we make love, we're expressing trust, curiosity, playfulness, even our unspoken fears. Our brains crave not just the physical sensation, but the psychological reassurance that we matter, that we're chosen, that we're connected. That's why even the smallest gestures, eye contact, laughter, tenderness, can be just as erotic as anything physical. They tell the brain, "You're safe here. You're seen." If you look closely, you'll notice that desire is cyclical. It grows when it's nurtured emotionally and fades when ignored. Our brains are storytellers. They want to know why something matters. When sex becomes disconnected from meaning, it loses its spark. But when it's linked to emotion, to shared experience, to a sense of being understood, it becomes infinitely richer. Every person's erotic story is different, yet it follows a universal truth. Desire is about connection. It's about the way our brains link touch with trust, pleasure with purpose, and intimacy with identity. And when we embrace that truth, when we stop seeing sex as just a physical act and start seeing it as an emotional language, we unlock a completely different kind of satisfaction. One that isn't measured in intensity or frequency, but in presence. Because at the end of the day, the most powerful moments of intimacy aren't just when bodies meet. They're when minds and emotions align, When your brain feels safe enough to let go, to be vulnerable, to experience pleasure without fear, that's when desire feels most alive. And that's when sex transcends the physical and becomes something profoundly human. Desire isn't just about what excites us, it's about what connects us. It's a reflection of our deepest psychological needs, the stories we tell ourselves about love, and the ways our brains search for meaning through touch and emotion. When you understand that, you start to see intimacy not as a puzzle to solve, but as a conversation to keep having with yourself and with the people you let in. Because in the end, it's not just the body that seeks pleasure, it's the brain that seeks understanding. And that's what makes desire not just an instinct, but an art,